When the white Europeans came in contact with black people for the very first time, they knew black people were extremely dominant. White Europeans did not have to think hard to understand that if black people were given the same facilities they had, it would completely overpower them everywhere. This includes social, economic, and political life, including even private life, where white Europeans feared losing their partners due to black people's dominance. That's when white Europeans thought about marginalizing black people, alienating them, as Karl Marx said. It was the threat perception of black people that made white Europeans ultra-defensive, imposing a racist system. But what are the reasons that made white Europeans view black Africans as a threat? Let's find that out in this video.
The Black History Archives.
Number 8. Economic independence threat. Throughout history, white Europeans perceived black individuals as a threat because of their potential to achieve economic independence, which directly challenged the rooted power structures and economic exploitation. Therefore, black communities striving for economic autonomy, whether through cooperative farming, artisanal crafts, or trade unions, were viewed as direct competitors to the economic interests of white Europeans. These initiatives challenged the dominance of European-owned businesses and disrupted the exploitation of cheap labor, often leading to pushback and attempts to hinder black economic empowerment. The economic system of colonial and post-colonial societies heavily relied on the exploitation of black labor for agricultural, industrial, and domestic tasks. Black communities seeking economic independence threatened this exploitative labor model by advocating for fair wages, improved working conditions, and ownership of production means. White Europeans feared losing their inexpensive labor force and the associated profits. Efforts by black communities to achieve economic independence also undermined the colonial economic control maintained by white Europeans over African resources and markets. Through the establishment of local enterprises, trade networks, and self-sustaining agricultural practices, black communities challenged the economic dependency fostered by colonial policies, thus destabilizing colonial economies. The search for economic independence by black communities further weakened the authority of colonial governments and diminished the legitimacy of colonial rule. As black Africans gained economic autonomy and financial resources, they relied less on colonial administrators. They became more empowered to advocate for their rights and challenge oppressive colonial policies through economic means. And today, when more and more black people are becoming economically independent, white people's fear is growing increasingly. It's because white people know that if black people accumulate wealth, there will be possibly no limits to the heights they can rise to. Number 7. Fear of rebellion. Throughout history, white Europeans and Americans have regarded black people as a threat due to the fear of rebellion, which arose from several factors. The prospect of revolt against slavery was a constant concern for white slaveholders during slavery. The harsh conditions endured by enslaved black individuals, combined with their longing for freedom, instilled a pervasive fear among white Europeans and Americans that slaves would rise against their oppressors, resulting in a loss of control and potential violence. And this fear exists to this day. White people know they exploited black people and continue to do so. Therefore, the guilt surfaces the fear that at any moment, black people can unite and revolt against the inhumane and exploitative system. In the past, white people saw what black people were capable of if they were united. Organized resistance or rebellion by black individuals or communities posed a direct challenge to the established social order rooted in white supremacy. It was feared to disrupt the hierarchical structure of society, jeopardizing the power and privilege enjoyed by white Europeans and Americans. Slave uprisings represented a significant economic threat to white slaveholders, risking the loss of valuable property and wealth. The economic reliance on slavery created a climate of apprehension among white Europeans and Americans, fearing substantial financial losses and upheaval in the event of a rebellion. These fears are ingrained in white people's minds to this day. Number 6. Threat to social order. What if the social order and system that favors white people no longer remain? This means black people would compete with white people and would get equal chances of holding top positions. This is a nightmare for white supremacists, a fear they cannot hide. The social hierarchy in white-dominated societies was deeply ingrained, with white individuals at the top and black individuals marginalized at the bottom. Any challenge to this hierarchy, such as organized resistance or rebellion by black individuals or communities, was seen as a direct threat to the existing social structure. White Europeans and Americans feared that such actions could undermine their power and privilege, leading to social unrest and instability. Above all, it would deprive white people of the position of power and privilege. And this fear continues to this day. White supremacy, the belief in the inherent superiority of white people over other races, was and is a cornerstone of the social order in white-dominated societies. Any challenge to white supremacy, whether through acts of resistance or demands for equality and justice by black individuals or communities, is now viewed as a threat to the core principles of white dominance. Number 5. Cultural and religious differences and hegemony threat. What if white people adopt the culture and religion of black people, which they earlier ridiculed? That's a fear that white supremacists feel every day. White Europeans and Americans often saw the cultures and traditions of black communities as unfamiliar and inferior. The customs, languages, and social norms of black societies were viewed as distinct from the dominant white culture, leading to a feeling of cultural intimidation. This apprehension arose from a lack of understanding and prejudice, with black cultural practices frequently depicted as primitive or uncivilized. Similarly, differences in religious practices between white European and black communities worsened the perceived threat. Many black individuals practiced religions such as Islam or indigenous African spiritual beliefs, which were often seen as challenging Christian supremacy. The presence of non-Christian faiths among black populations raised concerns about religious conflict and instability. Moreover, the existence of thriving black cultures and communities challenged the cultural dominance of white Europeans and Americans. Cultural dominance refers to the superiority of one culture over others, where the dominant culture's principles, beliefs, and practices are considered superior and imposed on others. The resilience and resistance of black culture threatened the monopoly of white culture and posed a challenge to efforts to assimilate black individuals into white cultural standards. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community and we need your support. Let's continue now. Number 4. Intellectual threat. The belief in black intellectual inferiority was deeply ingrained in the racist ideologies of white Europeans and Americans. However, the presence of intellectually accomplished black individuals challenged these stereotypes and directly threatened the notion of black inferiority. Even it showed how intellectually superior black people could be if they were given equal opportunities. However, white Europeans and Americans worried that acknowledging black intellectual capabilities would undermine the foundation of racial superiority upon which their social and political systems were built. Intellectual empowerment among black individuals posed a challenge to the existing social order, where white dominance was maintained by suppressing black voices and ideas. As black intellectuals gained prominence and influence, they advocated for social justice, equality, and empowerment within their communities. This activism disrupted the status quo of racial oppression and jeopardized the stability of white-dominated societies. The achievements and progress of black intellectuals presented a challenge to white Europeans and Americans across various domains, including education, employment, and leadership roles. As black individuals excelled academically and professionally, they competed for the same resources and opportunities as their white counterparts. This competition was perceived as a threat to white privilege and the established power structures that favored white individuals. Number 3. Sexual threat. Throughout history, white Europeans and Americans have often viewed black individuals as a sexual threat due to ingrained stereotypes and biases. This perception can be traced back to colonial and slavery-era ideologies, which portrayed black men as excessively sexual and threatening predators. These damaging stereotypes were employed to justify the exploitation and mistreatment of black individuals, particularly black women, by white Europeans and Americans. One aspect of this perception of sexual threat revolves around the fear of miscegenation, which refers to interracial relationships and offspring seen as a threat to the purity of white lineage. Such relationships challenge the established racial hierarchy and undermine the perceived superiority of white Europeans and Americans. Black men were frequently depicted as sexually aggressive and predatory toward white women, leading to the enactment of racist laws and social norms aimed at preventing interracial relationships and preserving racial purity. Furthermore, concerns about Black sexual independence and agency posed a challenge to the patriarchal power dynamics upheld by white Europeans and Americans. The notion of Black individuals, especially Black women, having autonomy over their own sexuality and reproductive choices, was viewed as rebellious and disruptive to white dominance. Efforts were made to control and regulate the sexual behavior of Black individuals through legislation, societal norms, and systemic oppression. Today, when these limitations have been superficially removed, white people cannot help feeling threatened about what Black people can do. The biggest fear is to lose their partners to Black men, and we are already seeing cases where white women prefer Black men over white men. Number 2. Fear of retribution. The long-lasting effects of slavery, colonization, and systemic racism have subjected Black people to significant harm and exploitation by white Europeans and Americans. The cruelties of slavery, segregation, and discrimination have left profound scars on the Black community. As a result, some white individuals harbor a pervasive fear that Black people may seek retribution or seek revenge for these past injustices. Despite advancements in civil rights and equality, some white individuals perceive themselves as holding disproportionate power and privilege compared to Black people. This perceived power imbalance fosters feelings of insecurity and apprehension, causing some white individuals to view Black empowerment or calls for justice as threats to their own status and security. Instances of social unrest, protests, and riots sparked by racial injustices can heighten fears of retribution among some white individuals. They interpret these acts of resistance as direct challenges to their authority and control, leading to increased anxiety about potential reprisal or violence. Number 1. Loss of power and privilege. The social structure in white-dominated societies has always been based on racial hierarchy, where white individuals hold the top positions of power and privilege. Any challenge to this hierarchy, like demands for equality and justice from Black individuals or communities, threatens the established order. White Europeans and Americans fear that empowering Black people could lead to a shift in power dynamics, diminishing their own status and influence. As Black individuals strive for equality and access to opportunities, they compete for resources and positions traditionally held by white individuals. This economic competition is seen as a threat to the dominance and prosperity of white communities. Efforts to politically empower Black individuals, such as through voting rights and representation in government, are also seen as threats to the political dominance of white Europeans and Americans. The increased political influence of Black communities could bring about changes in policy priorities and decision-making processes that may not align with the interests of white individuals. This loss of political control is perceived as a threat to maintaining white power and privilege. What do you think? Do these reasons justify worse institutions like slavery and present-day racism? Isn't it true that white people tried marginalizing Black people instead of healthy competition with them? In the comments section right below, let us know your thoughts about Black Africans being viewed as a threat and whether this continues to this day. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.